Hello, welcome back to Mining Network, and apologies, there's been a few weeks without any content. I've taken a long needed break to the Philippines and I've just got back. And as I return, I got a phone call from a friend of the show that you'll all know, the CEO of Silver Tiger, Glenn Jessam. Glenn has become the chairman and one of the founders of a new company named Axo Copper. And it's, from what I've seen in terms of the presentation, the conversations I've had with the management team, seems like one of the most exciting IPOs of the year in the copper exploration space. I'm joined with the CEO and president, Jonathan Eglo. Jonathan, good to be with you.
Hey, Peter. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. I understand this is the first interview that the company has done ever. So a mining network exclusive here, which is good. Look, why don't we just start with, like I said, this to me, in terms of the project and the history and everything I know about it at the moment, I'm very impressed with. Why don't we just go into a little bit as to sort of where you're on the Sierra Madre trend, you're hitting grades of 5% copper over really good meterage, or 5-9 meters. Um, Quite a unique project. How did you get hold of it?
Yeah, so I feel like the way in which we got a hold of it is a little bit unique and gives a good description as to what the project is today. So really around 2017 or 2018, there was a local Mexican family that discovered high grade outcropping copper at surface in their own backyard. And they built a small 250 ton per day sulfide flotation plant, in their hometown, about 30 miles from La Huerta, our project. Um, and they started mining this outcrop, right? So it's in on the west coast of Mexico in Jalisco state, and for about 3 years they were doing grades, between 4 and 5% copper. They're getting excellent recoveries, and the way we found the project is we knew the person who was buying the copper's concentrate off of them, a local guy in Manzanillo, and so he gave our group the tip off to effectively go look at it because he had known that no one else had heard of this project before. And what we found, yeah, is this family was mining this outcrop. They took it down about 40 or 50 meters deep. So it's from surface. It was maybe 150 meters along strike, and they were making very good money for a private Mexican family, but they didn't necessarily care or grasp any kind of real exploration, right? They were making good money, and they didn't necessarily care about how big it could be. But obviously, with us looking at it from a lens of, you know, bigger company idea is, well, they found something that's very high grade. How big could the system be? And let's learn a little bit more about it. Um, so that's how we came to discover the project. And in 2022, we signed an agreement to acquire two concessions from the family. And then for the past 3 years, we've been doing further exploration work. We did our first round of drilling on it in late 2023 and into 2024. Raised $15 million as a private entity, and that's kind of led us to where we are today with IPOing. Now next week, but it's been a 3 year process as a private company to do some of the initial drilling just to make sure that we have something that is bigger than what the family was taking out. So that's where the company stands today.
Nice. Yeah. So your IPO date, correct me if I'm wrong, 4th of June, Wednesday, 4th of June, is when you're being listed on the TSX-V. I think ticker AXO. Um, okay. So interesting. So background is small family run mine essentially. They're producing and on a small scale. I think you said around 150 meters in strike, around 40 meters deep. Um, a bit different to the usual sort of route that people go down in this industry. But I guess that comes with some benefits, right? So before we go, I guess before we even go into that, what were the terms with with the family for you guys to get hold of this?
Yeah, so we signed upfront payment of $1.6 million US in cash, and then another $9.5 million of cash payments spread over 5 years, so just over $2 million a year. We're about $4 million into that today. The family also gets 5 million shares of the company. Again, 1 million shares spread over the next 5 years. And a bit of a unique component to this is there's no royalty associated with the deal or with the package, so it's royalty free concession.
Okay, all right. So powder dry for potential future financing by royalties. Um, what do you know about the metallurgy? Obviously, this is a technically a past producing asset up until very recently. Um, how much do you know? How much work has been done to date on metallurgy in terms of, sort of what we would consider good standard?
Yeah, we're a bit of a unique case where obviously the focus of the company right now for the next 12 to 18 months is going to be drilling, expansion, adding high grade tons, right? So the focus right now is on exploration, but we've had this benefit where there's almost like a 3-year de-risking bulk sample program that happened ahead of us. So de-risking it um, on grade, de-risking it on metallurgy, de-risking it on concentrate payability and purity of the concentrate. So yeah, it was effectively this de-risking program that happened in front of us, and now our job is to figure out at what proper scale this deposit should actually be mined at. So we think bigger than 250 tons per day because that's quite small, but what scale? What scale is it? Um, so yeah, we know that what the family was mining before, they were getting very good recoveries, north of 90% off of very rudimentary single stage flotation circuit. I mean, these guys were very entrepreneurial, caps off to them, but they're not necessarily metallurgists, pure metallurgists by background. It wasn't necessarily optimized. It was single stage rougher, but the purity of the concentrate kind of spoke for itself. Um, and it's really just comes down to it's chalcopyrite. And then when we get very high grades, I mean, you'll see at some points, we get 1 or 2 meters of 20% copper, 25% copper. So when we start seeing those grades, it's boronite, but generally it's copper hosted in chalcopyrite and boronite. And that it's just pure copper sulfide. And that makes for a really, really clean, clean metallurgy flow sheet. Um, so yeah, that is a unique component that's been somewhat de-risked, and it's also worth flagging that we're looking here at just copper sulfides. So when you're comparing it to copper equivalent, it's quite different. I know people copper equivalent. You can see good copper equivalent grades, but that's generally a mix of copper, lead, zinc, silver, gold, which comes with its own suite of payabilities and recoveries that can range from 30-40% to 90-95%, but they do all kind of get blended together, right? So we're a bit of a unique case where this isn't a copper equivalent with multiple different flotation circuits and multiple different payabilities and multiple different products. It's just really a pure high grade copper con.
Wow. Okay. All right. Massive. Um, maybe we can, maybe because I understand that you've done a drill program already, phase one. That was, I think you mentioned 2023, 2024. You've got the results of that back. Maybe we could open up the presentation, have a look at the cross section, and sort of get a bit of an idea as to what this looks like.
Yeah, and really the idea behind that first program was just ensure that the family didn't just take out some small high grade jewelry box that only went down 40 or 50 meters, right? So you can see from the cross section of the presentation, right, where our deepest drilling is around, we drilled about 200 meters below surface. Um, one of the first things we did when we got to site to make sure that it wasn't just some small high grade jewelry box is sampling at the bottom of the pit, which you can see in the cross section of the presentation. We're getting samples at the bottom of the pit of 26% copper, right? So it was quite obvious that there was still more below it. Um, and yeah, you can see from drilling in the cross sections, generally we find a higher grade 4, 5, 6 meter core, and then an alteration zone that can be 10 meters into the hanging wall or the footwall, that can be generally around maybe 1% copper. So, there's some of our results on the cross section, like LH22 here on the left, that higher grade 4 meter section was 13.5% copper, right? And that, I guess, quote, lower grade, wider interval was 9 meters at 6% copper, right? So, we're seeing some fairly unique grades, I guess you would say, for the junior copper space.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so too. I mean, I'm so used to seeing sort of 0.4, 0.5% copper grades now in big porphyry systems. It's you're almost led to believe that there are no more sort of high grade systems like this left in the world. But it's good that you got one. What's phase two looking like? Obviously, you've mentioned quite a while, well, for a couple of times here, that really the key goal for the company is to prove the scale. You've got so many tick boxes, but the scale is the big one, isn't it? It's turning this into a bigger company, something that investors can really get behind. Is to prove how large this can be. What does phase two look like?
Yeah, phase two, we're going to be drilling our biggest program yet. We're going to be looking to do about 15,000 meters. And that's going to be a combination of, it's predominantly going to be focused along this 1.5 kilometer area of focus where most of the work has been done to date, and really step out around that 1.5 kilometers. And like I mentioned before, the deepest drilling is only about 200 meters below surface. That we feel like is a clear and obvious place to keep extending it is at depth. I don't really know many copper systems that just cut themselves off at 200 meters. There's also the a big question here is it's a unique looking deposit, right? It's a steeply dipping copper sulfide dike hosted in andesite, right? The big question for us is, what is the source? So we've had geophysics done on the project IP, and you know I am like a lot of investors. You approach geophysics with a degree of skepticism, right? Because everyone's been misled from geophysics, right? You can put up this nice shiny colorful bullseye and drill right into the middle of it, and it's an absolute duster. And there's a reason why people get misled so often from geophysics, is because they don't take an already known discovery and overlay it with geophysics. And then that in turn tells you what you should be looking for, right? So we have the added benefit of a known discovery. And Las Marias, which is the name of the area that we call where the family was mining, returns a very good geophysics signal, right? Like with it already matches up well. So then when you apply geophysics across the broader property, you have a good idea and indication. So we're using that to try to define a source. Our best signal tends to come from at depth right below Las Marias. So maybe this is part of the theories, this could be part of a broader porphyry system. Not saying we're chasing a porphyry of 0.4 or 0.5%, because I think that's one of our best differentiating factors, is that we're not chasing a low grade porphyry. But generally, these porphyry systems can come with, what we're seeing, high grade dikes, or also, high grade breccias. There's a couple options to start defining more high grade tons before just looking for a low grade porphyry. So, there's a good thesis that there could be a breccia, somewhere right below Las Marias, or maybe a series of breccia pipes that could be the driver of some of the source that's driving all this high grade to surface. So, it's kind of a long-winded way of saying we're going to be stepping out and drilling, I guess, more of the same along the dike, which, if more of the same keeps returning several meters at some of the grades we're seeing, is a very good thing. But also using that as a vector to, it's almost like if the high grade is an area that's pointing us towards where we think the source of the mineralization could be. So, just keep stepping out towards what we believe to be the source. And in the meantime, define more high grade tons, and then also see what we find.
I think you mentioned that the people that were there before, they had around 150 meters of strike length, right? Did did I hear right that you were saying it's around 1.5 sort of trend that you've spotted from surface? Or
Yeah, we've defined it over, actually over 5 kilometers. There's really 1.5 kilometers where most of the work has been done to date. And you'll see on the presentation that stretches from an area to the south called El Aguila target all the way up to another target called Punta Cornelio. And that's a very good chunk for us to try to start defining right away. You can blow your brains out poking holes all over 5 kilometers. That's an absolutely massive area. But even if you run, back the envelope math on what could be defined over a 1.5 kilometer trend, it's a lot, right? So that's kind of the first area where most of the work is going to be done. But of course, we're also going to be budgeted for a regional program. I'd say probably 70% of the meters of the 15,000 meters is going to be drilled over this 1.5 kilometer trend. And the remaining is going to be stepping out to find new systems, which, we found results on surface of copper, up to so far up to 6%, 3 kilometers away from Las Marias. Like there's a couple areas that are screaming obvious that they need to be drilled for some kind of different or parallel trend. So we're going to be doing that as well.
Along that 70% of the drilling that you're doing that's along that 1.5 kilometer trend, is most of that going to be fairly shallow like you have done already? So sort of testing that 200-meter range along that whole trend, and how much of that do you think will go into sort of deeper drilling, testing the thesis that this continues the depth?
Yeah, it's going to be a combination. I'd say because we have so much of that strike still that can be drilled quite shallowly, in these holes that are maybe 120, 150 meters deep. Um, that's really good bang for your buck, right? Drilling, if you can define tonnage through holes that are, between 100 and 150 meters long versus being forced to define tonnage with, 400 and 450-meter long holes. I mean, you'd be used to seeing in the copper space companies drilling 1.5 kilometer holes, right? So we're going to take the easy wins on surface where we can get them when it's defining tons, but for sure we're also going to be drilling, some of these 300, 400, 450-meter holes because we think ultimately that's what's going to be necessary to learn more about the origin and the source, especially if we think the source is somewhere below Las Marias where we're seeing all these good grades, we're going to have to test it for depth as well. So a bit of a convoluted answer there, but I'd say because it's at surface, we have the ability to take some easy wins of building tonnage with shorter holes, but ultimately to find the source, you're going to see us poking some holes, 350, 400 meters below surface as well.
Okay, and the two concessions that you receive from the family, does that include the full 5 kilometer trend that you think is mineralized? That includes
Yeah.
the whole area. Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Continuous.
Okay. And what's the idea at the end of this campaign? So, say for example, you have success, you go down the 1.5 kilometer strike length, you're hitting very similar mineralization, say for example, as to what you did in phase one, but you're sort of demonstrating that along the strike. Would that give you enough for an inferred resource this time next year? Do you think, or at the back of this one, or will you need to do a bit more before you can plug some numbers in?
Yeah, maybe. Well, we'll see what comes in the next 12 months. We're not really a group of companies, and when I consider a group of companies, it would be Axo, Silver Tiger, and Go Gold. We're not ones to just keep drilling and keep, punting a resource down the road, year after year after year. Because I know that's what some people do, and sometimes it even works well. It's just not really our MO. We like to show people what we have. Um, that being said, I think about what is the best bang for our buck for spending the next, 7 or $10 million on exploration. Um, we're in a business where you generate some of your best returns by taking some of the bigger risks and doing step outs. So I think about, okay, how can we spend, call it $7 million and, return 1, 200, 300 million of perceived market value on that. It's not necessarily from doing drilling that is resource definition at this stage. There's a component of that where it will for sure come to de-risking. You need to plug some holes closer to one another. I really think our best bang for our buck right now is figuring out, you know, envelope and scale, and then figuring out like what this should be restarted at, rather than looking at what kind of drilling needs to go in it today to define a resource. But we'll know that after this program in the next 12 months. So, if I were to put a time on it, you know, definitely not a resource in 2025, as we're trying to still just see what we have on our hands in terms of scale. Um, you know, check back in 12 months once we're done this program, and then I'd imagine probably something after that, maybe later, second half 2026 kind of thing.
To be honest, I'm just excited to see what the potential scale of this will be. Obviously, we'll wait for some drill results and we'll see how the campaign goes. But upon success, I'd love to even just know a snapshot in time this time next year as to how big this thing could look.
Yeah,
Even from 200 meters along the strike length, it
we
looks.
have the same questions. Like we have the exact same questions that you guys or investor has, which is like this: the grade looks unbelievable. We have a very good surface expression. We have reason to believe it could be big. We're finding parallel systems, 3 kilometers away at surface with good grades. Like, we're excited to figure out what is there, right? not so excited at the idea of being forced to do tiny step outs so we can build this initial resource. Like, there's a time for that. There's absolutely a time for that. It's completely necessary, especially considering, we see this as a project that can be built by us, built by a junior. It's not forced to be, bought by someone with a larger balance sheet. So we do want to see, there will be a time for de-risking, but right now we're just kind of in this giddy time of, you could call it a bunch of different words for it, people associated with the Lassonde curve. But it's like the figuring out of what it is a very exciting time.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something there as well, that this in theory should not be a capex killer. This is definitely some, well, say definitely, but this has the telltale signs of something that would be achievable for a junior company to build and get it in production. But obviously, I know Glenn and the team's track record in Mexico. I think they've done this around 7 times. They they don't always get to production because they usually sell it, right? But that's always a nice problem to have as well if it looks attractive. What maybe we should go on to the IPO. Um, how much? Tell us a little bit about sort of the price, what the rationale of doing the IPO right now is, and yeah, just a little bit more info in general around what to expect, market cap.
Yeah, so the IPO, we're going to be coming out with a market cap of about 70 million Canadian. That'll of course be an enterprise value of about 60 million Canadian. So that was done at a 55 cent unit deal, and it really, I guess, the rationale behind it was, it just feels like the next genesis for the company, right? It's a group that has, the ability to raise money privately, as we've done. $15 million privately is not something to skip over. It's not something that everyone could do. But as these companies get bigger and we need to, we in particular, as we're doing our biggest drill program yet, it's the IPO makes a lot of sense, just to access new capital, because there's a lot of people who, myself included, I put personal money into this thing in 2022, and we knew, we're just starting the company, and we knew a lot less about the project. I'm willing to put money in and sit there for years, decades. I don't care, as long as it takes. I love it. I'm interested in it. But you know, accessing new capital on the public markets just really gives us the ability to raise more money and put more money into the ground, which is really what's necessary when it comes to defining scale and figuring out what the next steps are, and building it ourselves or selling it, whatever it comes out as. But it was a natural genesis, the next step.
You're listing on Wednesday. For those involved in the story or following the story from Wednesday onwards, what can we expect to see over the summer and over the next 12 months? What's Newsflow looking like?
Yeah, so it's going to be a busy period of news flow. You'll see press releases coming out from us virtually right away. Uh, Not only on some of the new drilling that we're upstarting right now, but also as we're finding out more about the district and some of these kind of, I guess we call it, new regional discoveries that haven't seen a drill bit yet, but we think warrant upcoming drilling. So it'll be a combination of drill results, or in and around Las Marias, regional program, which is going to be, results on surface that we found, and then a timeline onto when we're going to drill. So, it's going to be a very busy and newsy time, right from the get go, and through the summer into the fall. We're just going to be busy with news results.
Good. All right. Always love an IPO that follows with a lot of news flow. And if if the drill results or anything like they have been, I'm sure it'll get some people excited. So, John, really appreciate you giving us the exclusive on this and sharing the story with our network.
Yeah, no, appreciate the time, Peter.